So, you want to learn how to use Blender to create Quake models and export them and do everything in Blender. You don't have to use any of those weird archaic softwares Quake is known for. You're in the right place. Alright, so without further ado, let's get to the first thing. When you import something in Quake or to Quake, the scale is very, very large compared to the normal colloquial scale that you might be used to making textures at in Blender. This is because the people who've made this add-on wanted to create it so that the scale on the viewport is the same as the scale in Quake. So if you, say, create a cube and then you turn on your increments, these will be moving by 1 unit each time. And you can see that's pretty correct. Another small quirk is the way that Quake models face. So they face to the X direction, which is not correct when imported, but it is correct for Quake. So you'll need to always export to this direction. In the same vein, something that is weird in Blender that isn't in Quake is that when you import and export Quake models from Blender, they're always going to be facing the X direction, just because of how they work in Quake. This can be weird with stuff like the pie menu, or symmetrize. If you're adding and naming bones on one side and you want to flip the controls over, so you don't have to do two sets of work, that will be a problem for this. So what you want to do is when you import a model and you know you're going to be doing rigging work is to rotate them to this direction and then maybe reset the transforms once you're done with whatever work needed to be faced there, just so you don't forget. As well as the facing direction, when exporting, you will want to keep your characters at a relative height to each other, because this is the origin used for the character in export. So if I import another character like a wetsuit, you'll see that it uses the ground as its 0 as its ground. So if I move it over here, because this is a rotating model, because it's an item, it'll be rotating around this point and it will be very silly. So you want to keep everything at 0, which can obviously just be done by going into the transforms menu, resetting all the stuff to 0. Now onto UVs. UVs in Blender work a little bit differently than they do in the normal MDL format, and that can cause some bloat of your model. When you export, say if I make a boundary seam here, and I export this off, and I then import it back, this whole model will be one UV, except for this island right here. This will be split off so you can kind of disconnect it from the body and move it around. So what you want to do when you import a Quake model is just to A, to select everything, M, merge by distance. See, 91 vertices were connected here because there is a seam across the side of the guy to make the two faces. The increase in file size isn't too large. It can double, but you're doubling in MDL. Your added skins will be more of a problem than anything you can do here. And exporter tags. On exporting a model in Blender, you will get a set of the presets and stuff on this side, and so you can select the palette. If you're making something for Hexen 2, it uses the same format as Quake 1, so this can be helpful. Stuff like rotate is used for items, so the spinning items and power-ups. That's the only way you can do it. You don't want to animate that by vertex because it could be very choppy. And here is basically your traces for each of the types. So a jib throwing and spilling blood, or a rocket firing a trail, that is actually handled in the MDL flags. These are a set thing in the code, and you can't actually change these once you've hooked up the MDL. Just to keep that in mind. Transparency will use exactly what it says right there. It'll use index 255 to basically make it a 1-bit transparency on the model. This can be useful for certain things, but I would steer clear and Alright, and the material slots. So in Quake, you can have multiple skins for one model, basically being able to select out different colors and looks for your character's skin. And these are stored in Blender as materials. So you just use the skin slots to basically move them around. So if I wanted the default to be this grungy green one, I can press it up. So now it's skin 0, the default, 1 and 2. Try to keep that in mind if you're exporting your model and you're not finding the correct texture on him. Another problem relating to textures can be found in the shading workspace. So there is a interesting caveat with how these things are handled. If you have more than one image texture per se in this shader menu for the material you're using, it will use the first one and then like basically go down as the geometry does, I believe. So if you have this above, it'll be the first one in the group. But it'll make a skin group out of them and basically animate between them like it's an animated model. I've never wanted this, but if you do, that's how you do it. And if you don't, and your model is exporting and you're getting weird flashing of an old PNG, that's the way to deal with it. And while we're in here in the shading menu, any shaders and stuff like Principled BSDF or Glossy will not be exported to the game, as that's impossible. Quake only reads a texture as an emission, which is just a flat, no shading. There is some shading, but it's quite minor in Quake. So this is probably the best way to look at your textures, is the given emission shader. One last thing about texturing is that the way that OpenGL clients handle small seams and such in your model while texture filtering is on is that it takes the color from the top left and basically fills it with transparency, which is somehow better. I'm not sure why it does this. But if you're having problems with your model being transparent or not exporting with the right colors and such, yeah, just grab a random index color you're not using and just drop it in the top right-hand corner. Yeah, so whenever I make a model, I just drop like something like that in the corner, just to make sure that it's not going to export and fuck over my model. All right, and animation. Say hello to the Kamikaze. He's in Dwell 2, and he is currently being imported as an MDL. I have the original source files for him, and this will be relevant in a second. So when you import a model for Quake into Blender, it'll transfer all of the animation frames, which are vertex animated, by the way. Blender does not export bones or anything of the sort. It will, MDL does not store bone animation. All of your bone animation will be converted to vertex frames when you export it. So it's a lossy format. So if you want to edit an animation, you can do it frame by frame by, say, animating, moving your thing up to a certain frame. So let's find that. Right, so frame 45 is the one we're editing right now. So we go into edits and we just, some dumb shit like that. And then anytime it's frame 45, you'll see that it comes out because we've animated it like that. So the problem with this is obvious, and I'm not going to continue explaining it. So there is an obvious way around this. It is to keep your original files. And what this allows you to do is see, we've got bones now, we've got FKs, we've got IKs and stuff. And what this will do is be crunched down from the original animation, so bones and stuff like that, into vertex animation when it is moved to MDL. So that means that, say if you import something that already has vertex animation, you will need to either delete all of the shape keys, or you'll need to delete some of the shape keys and basically reanimate it without. So what I do here is that if I imported the Kamikaze again, let's say, I had rigged up the Kamikaze, but I had no keyframes in it. What I would need to do is basically stack them on top of each other and try to reanimate the bones in place of the animation. I'm sure there is a way to do this without this problem, but it seems way too difficult for me. So I'm pretty sure when we did the Kamikaze originally, he already had a running animation. So we just took him, traced over his running animation, and then I and Creator animated on top of that. These are my animations here. And it'll export all good. You will not be able to go back, so always keep your blend files handy for this kind of thing. And one last thing, the only thing that I can remember that's left, only quirk, is that Blender will always export your frames that you have selected in the timeline right here. If I start my animation, say here, it will not have the running or walking animations. It will idle at 0 and everything will be offset. So make sure that you've got what you need selected as per the QC file or the current animation set in this stuff. So I would say end it at last frame here, start it just after the idle, because I usually use idle frames, and there we go. So instead of, and the way Quake counts its frame count is from 0. So say if I start at 10, that is now 0 for coding purposes. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. All right, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something about the importer and exporter and its little quirks, and hopefully I fixed something for you. If you have any further problems, just let me know in the comments and we can sort it out, because I've almost certainly run into it before. It's a little bit of a weird program, but it's saved my ass so many times that I can't live without it now. See you whenever I see you.